Earlier, I'd been operated on, and I was physically ill as well during this period. Mentally, I just totally fell apart about halfway through. I developed for the first time in my life acute agoraphobia. I couldn't leave the house. I think that this really started with this attempted murder that I felt had been intended for me. But then you have to remember that I didn't want to walk around my building because I was hearing people talking about the lady with VD. And I had been very concerned when they were going to arrest me, that they were going to arrest me in the lobby of my building and humiliate me among my neighbors further. So I think this was the genesis of a sudden inability to go out. And some of my friends were very, very good. They would come over and try to force me to get out and to just get my mind off what was going on. It worked for a while. Around September, October, it didn't work anymore. The one friend came over alarmed that I had not left the house for a week, and he said, "You just got to walk around the block." And I remember we stepped outside, just about 2 or 3 steps, and I just started crying, and I said, "Don't make me. I can't do it. I just can't do it." And then I went home and stayed inside for about 2 more weeks. And meanwhile, during this period of time, there was a friend, a new friend, who I met under somewhat mysterious circumstances, but he was very, very helpful, and I obtained an apartment for him in my building, and he did some of the food shopping that I could not get out and do. And his name was Jerry Levin. And at any rate, the worst period of time was approximately 2 weeks before the trial. My lawyers informed me that with a federal case, there was a 95% chance of conviction. They then gave me the good news that for the trial, they wanted my parents to be seated in the front row and watch the entire proceedings. And I kept saying, "We can't do that to them. It's going to be awful enough for them to read it in the papers." And they said, "You don't understand. If your parents don't show up, a jury doesn't realize that, this is what you want. They're just going to..." They felt that the one circumstance that might get me acquitted was this unusually close relationship with my parents. On top of it, I was going through some Scientology material that I had obtained, and there was the name of Jerry Levin. Now, I felt horribly betrayed, but at the same time, I simply did not want to believe it. I was very naive, and I kept saying, well, it's a very common name, especially in a city like New York. Meanwhile, we had tried every single move possible to get the trial stopped, but I was in a very, very nervous state, and it became impossible for me to be tested correctly. And we went to some doctors who said that they thought the only thing that might work would be if I would go into a state where I didn't know what was going on, meaning sodium pentothal or truth serum, because to do that, you have to be, you're unconscious. It's like an operation. So the problem was we couldn't find a doctor who would give me a sodium pentothal test, because by this time I weighed 83 pounds. I had started at about 98, and it became very, very dangerous to go and put somebody under as if for an operation when you weighed that. And I kept saying I didn't care if the sodium pentothal killed me, because if I had to stand trial for what I didn't do and humiliate everyone and go through this humiliation, that I would just as soon be dead anyway. And we finally did find a doctor 2 weeks before trial who gave me a sodium pentothal test. I was unconscious for 7 hours. I don't know what I said during it. I do know that when I came to, my mother was standing there, and I said, "What happened? What did I say?" And she just said, "It's okay. It's all over. There won't be a trial." The government wanted to save face because they don't like to admit that they've made a mistake. So they said that they would postpone the trial, but they would not actually drop the charges at that time. They also ordered me to see a psychiatrist, which I felt was very humiliating. The government did not drop the charges, and for 2 years after all this, I still had to worry on a daily basis whether one day there was going to be a trial, and all of these things that I was afraid of, the publicity and so on, was going to happen. The next year was 1974, and there were a number of new lawsuits against me, continued harassment, including harassment of my family and their clergymen, new spies. By the summer, which would be about 7 months after the worst period of this whole thing, I remember one of my friends said that that was the first time they'd seen me smile in a year and a half. And I had decided, in fact, that I was going to try to get back this gentleman that I was interested in. And I threw a birthday party to have an excuse to invite him to something and sent him an invitation. And he then wrote me the most incredible letter back. And what I found out was that there was then a 5th anonymous smear letter about me. This one sent to him and his bosses. And he would never talk to me again and never has. In 1975, the charges against me were finally dropped. But during this period, they started a new type of harassment. And that is, I began receiving things in the mail, such as copies of, I had kept a diary from when I was 17 to about 20. And there was my diary suddenly coming back to me. Copies of letters that I had sent out, my carbon copies of it. The psychiatrist report that Mr. Dardenneau explained that he stole. In 1976, the charges were, no, excuse me, in late 75, the charges were finally dropped. At that point, some very bizarre things happened that it wasn't until later I would learn were part of another attempt to put me in jail. But, for example, somebody was calling a number of my close friends, imitating my voice to a degree that was good enough that some people had stopped talking to me, others called and yelled at me, why should I have called and been so rude and so on. I kept saying, I didn't call. And then I went to a writers' meeting and someone said, gee, how was Washington? I haven't been to Washington in 2 years. They said, you called from Washington. I didn't understand at the time why these things were being done. Also I was with a group of writers and someone showed me a joke. And I realized afterwards that it appeared to be an attempt to get my fingerprint again. And I became very, very upset because after all, I had a quote record, end quote. And I was very concerned about the possibility of more bomb threats. There are many, many more things that were done to me over the years. I'm trying to summarize a little bit. In December of 1976, I became very, very tired of it all. By that time, there were 9 lawsuits against me. Right before I went to court, all the stuff that was remailed to me that had been mailed in the past, sort of a subtle blackmail kind of, this is what's going to happen if you don't settle. Scientology wanted me to settle quite badly. Also, they convinced me at that time that they had changed and that they really were a very nice organization and that by my continued statements and stance against them and my book, I was preventing them from doing the good deeds that they wanted to do and that they were doing by bringing up the bad things all the time. And in December of 76, I agreed, in a sense, the easiest thing is just say that I agreed, in a sense, not to badmouth them, and they agreed not to badmouth me. While they were telling me that they had changed, unbeknownst to me, there was a man named Michael Meisner, and he had been a top GO operative, and they were holding him under gag and handcuff. And this man knew that I had been criminally framed, and he knew about a lot of things that had been going on. In the summer of 1977, the FBI raided the 3 Scientology organizations. On October 12, 1977, the FBI called me. Now remember that this was a 5-year period that I had never been able to prove my innocence. The government considered me a criminal. I had a quote record, end quote. And the FBI called out of the blue and said, we have just received evidence that you were innocent of those original charges. And I hung up the phone and cried. And I, in fact, tried to reach that person that was no longer talking to me, but he had since remarried. I worked with the FBI for the next couple of years. I did learn before, in the investigation that was going on, that the murder attempt on Joy was seemingly intended for me by Scientology. I learned that Scientology had broken into my New York lawyer's office. And this was one of many lawyers they went to break into, but that was the first one.